Welcome to the CMO Scoop. I'm your host, Lara August. I'm the CEO of Robot Creative. We have worked with thousands of what we call very large small businesses. We write marketing plans, provide marketing leadership to companies on a part-time basis. So those consultants are called fractional CMOs or chief marketing officers. We have a team of talented directors and a growing network of CMOs that we place with clients. And each of these CMOs brings their unique background and perspective to the table. I wanted to take advantage of that. So every month I have a conversation with one of our CMOs or directors, and we cover topics and recurring themes that we see in the businesses that we work with. So today, my guest is Lana Harris. She is my partner here at Robot Creative, and she is also our Director of Marketing and leads the CMO program. So today, we're going to be discussing marketing plans, which it's our favorite thing in the world. So thank you for those of you who are joining us, and thank you, Lana, for this conversation.
Absolutely. It'll be fun.
Awesome. So Lana, you and I have created a lot of marketing plans. But what's interesting is we've created a lot of marketing plans. We haven't seen a lot of marketing plans, right? And I just wanted to ask you, so I've been doing this for 30 years here, going on 30 years here at Robot. I'm just curious from your prior experience and also here at Robot working with our clients, like how many actual formal marketing plans have you seen from the client side?
It's a really small number, probably less than 5. If I had to guess, maybe 2. And there were problems with those to begin as well, because they weren't real marketing plans, not like what we put together today.
What do you mean by they weren't real marketing plans?
Well, sometimes I saw plans that got put together that were very elaborate, usually by consulting teams or groups that didn't really dive into the operation of the business, and subsequently were collecting dust on the shelf. And so they weren't executable. There was a lot of theory, a lot of research, but not a lot of plans that you could then put into motion. Conversely, I saw a lot of media plans. Those were most of what I've seen and operated with in the past was an advertising plan, a media plan that helped spend the budget, but wasn't really a true marketing plan with initiatives tied to business goals.
Yeah, and that tracks with what I've seen. I've only seen a couple of formal marketing plans, and some of them are like very impressive, like 80 pages, lots. And to your point, lots of great research, lots of great background, probably created by consultants for these larger companies, like on the larger end of the types of companies that we usually work with. And, but yeah, they may not have had a lot of guidance for how you're supposed to execute and implement that plan because they were written by consultants or researchers as opposed to people that were used to actually doing the activities. And when you talk about the media plans, Lana, these are either coming from an independent media buyer who's putting together advertising from different channels, or it might be a plan from an individual channel, right? Like if you approach a specific radio or television station, or a lot of them are grouped together now, yes. That it might be like, here's how we're going to reach your audience using our channel's resources, if that's
right.
Correct.
Yeah. And if you have a professional media planner on staff or under contract, you will get a broader plan. But again, it is all about the media spend. But most of the time it's like, oh, well, your TV rep or your radio rep or the print rep will give you a plan that encompasses their solutions, but it doesn't holistically work as a marketing plan for the business.
Yeah. And so that's what we're here to talk about today. We want to help small businesses understand what an actionable marketing plan might look like, right? Something that isn't going to gather dust on a shelf. It's not just like an advertising plan presented by a sales rep, like those can be wonderful, but they are not comprehensive in the way that we're talking about. And we want, again, comprehensive, but that you can use and get done. So yeah, I think it sounds funny, but let's start by talking about like, what is a marketing plan? Like what goes into it? And so we want to kind of break that down for anybody that's listening.
Absolutely. So I always start with kind of who your audience is. And a lot of times it's not one audience, it's multiple audiences. So who are you trying to target through your marketing initiatives, and really break that down by the audience groups, or sometimes we put that in the form of personas or different buying audiences. But that's kind of a number one step for me.
Yeah, we many times go into businesses where there might be, maybe it's different products or services, and they have radically different audiences for each product or service. Or it might be one product or service, but they may have audiences that you can't, several different audiences that cannot be reached via the same channels. And so, or they might have a different path that they enter the business. And it's so important to start with who you're trying to reach and to clearly define them for how you reach them, for positioning or messaging themes, if you want to talk about positioning or messaging, because that might vary.
Yeah. So if you start with the audiences, it kind of flows from there. So within that, you also need to look at what your positioning is for each of those audiences compared to your marketplace or your competitive landscape. And then the messaging that needs to be applied to each audience. So like you mentioned before, you might have several different products and a different audience that applies to each product. Well, the messaging on each is going to be different. Or if you have one product, but really radically different audiences because there's different use cases, for instance, the messaging there is different because different buying groups have different pain points and challenges that you're solving for. So the messaging might look radically different based on who you're marketing to and the channel where you're in.
Absolutely. So we need to start with audiences. We need to clearly define them, where we're going to reach them, what their messaging, pain points, decision-making drivers, those things are. And then, the next part that comes into a marketing plan is, what we always see. Every small business has lots of activities, but we want to actually map those activities to these audiences and these goals, right?
Yeah, and really in an organized way to where you can understand, kind of the funnel, where you're going to reach them the first time, what's their first touch, what's a reinforcement or a consideration tactic, what's really going to help them move from considering to sales mode. It's just really mapping those activities out so that you can have some type of expected outcomes at the end of it. So looking at that and organizing by audience and by channels, how you're going to go about awareness, consideration, sales, retention, growth, whatever phase of the funnel they might be in. And then really trying to understand what expected outcomes should be. So what are your benchmarks? What type of reach or frequency, if it's a media type activity, or what is your engagement point that you're going to then measure results on?
Absolutely. And once you've defined these activities, you can start to apply a budget to them, right? So any good marketing plan should have a budget. And we're going to talk more about that in a little bit too, and the different ways to budget. And I think probably the only other thing we haven't touched on is a calendar. So important, right?
Yeah. So timelines, especially if you're trying to write a new plan and change things up or try new things in the coming year, you can't do and start and evaluate everything on day one. So really looking hard at what is going to take some infrastructure or setup time, and really try and plan that out on a Gantt chart, a timeline, a calendar, however you look at that. And then looking at what type of ramp up time you need for each initiative to give you time to both set things up, get it started, and that gives you the time or capacity to then start the next thing. And most of the time, it takes a few months to get through all of your setup activities, but you want to start something right away. You can't afford to just do all your setup activities in Q1 and just hope the business comes in while you're working on it. So in order to do that, you plan out the lowest hanging fruit, the most important activities, and you start with those, and then you move into the next phase of setup.
And I love that you're addressing this because for most of the plans that we've seen, they're more of like an editorial calendar where they'll have campaigns. They'll say, here's what we're talking about each quarter, but they don't address what you're speaking to, which is infrastructure. In most small businesses, There are website changes that need to happen first, or there is collateral that needs to be developed, or messaging that has to be developed before a campaign, like an advertising campaign, could even launch. There might be CRM setup that needs to happen, or marketing automation tools that need to be configured. So whatever it is that's happening, when we write a marketing plan, we like to include the marketing department infrastructure that needs to be set up or created. Or say we're doing social media, you might need to have a whole strategy that's put together first before it can be implemented. So you might map off on a calendar a month or two worth of work to get the creative and the infrastructure and the research done before it actually launches.
And I think the biggest part of a marketing plan is how that maps to the business goals, because you can do a lot of stuff and things, but if you're not tracking what you're trying to accomplish in real world terms for the business, it might be a lot of wasted effort that you just are not aware that all of these things are really important. But if you're not affecting business goals, then you might need to reevaluate the effectiveness of each of these activities.
Absolutely. And we do. In a small business, usually there's stuff and things. There are activities, there are things happening. But speaking of goals, it's really hard to write a marketing plan, an effective one anyway, without really clear business goals. So, I want to talk about like business goals first, and it helps to have them very clear, not like fuzzy goals, but concrete goals. And business leaders sometimes aren't including the marketing teams in that goal setting. So if they're not like at the C level or the executive level, a marketing team may have to wait for a leadership team to do their annual planning before that information is even passed off. And unfortunately, a lot of times we see marketing teams that just don't ever even get that information.
They can tend to be very reactionary, because if they're not included in any of the strategy or the goal setting meetings, or at least receive a pass off, they're receiving bits and pieces as people pass by or request things. And so it can become the, kind of they're chasing around the goals, trying to figure out what the goals are so they know what to do. So it is really important that they are a part of that big picture so that they understand how to support each of the initiatives. I mean, it can be difficult even getting to those non-fuzzy goals, especially if you're in a very sales-driven, like people-driven organization where there's a top line number and everyone has to go figure out how to get there. Salespeople can figure out what they sell best and go try and hit those numbers, but a marketing team doesn't have an unlimited budget to kind of try everything all at once. So it's really helpful if you can break that top line number down into where do we have the most opportunity? What categories of service or products are leading the way? Where can marketing most impact the sales organization? Because some things are add-ons that a salesperson might want to add to a contract, but the leading item is all over here. So if marketing focuses on driving that one thing, then the sales team can come in and upsell. For instance, it depends on the organization. So it's really important to be on the same page about what those drivers are.
Yeah. So you've kind of alluded to, often as a company, there will be a top line revenue goal that's set for the year, right? Like, and it might be like, oh, we want to hit this specific number, or we want to increase by 15 or 20 or 50 or whatever the percentage is. So oftentimes, like a leadership team will have very broad goals like that. Sometimes they'll be broken down more specifically into product or service lines, as Lana mentioned. So that can help you see, depending on the growth that has already occurred in those product or service lines, what kind of the anticipated results would be. If everything just held steady, you might be able to say like, okay, which of these is going to need more effort or less effort to generate more visibility or to generate more leads. But there's, those are typically what the business or the company goals look like. And so we need to talk about how you break those down into marketing goals. So that's one is, revenue translates to product sales, but then Lana, talk about how you might set marketing goals related to increasing a certain product or service.
Sure. So a good working relationship with your sales and operations team is going to be critical to make smart marketing goals. because you want to make your goals based on results. A lot of marketing has a lot of numbers. We're very data-driven people, but not every number is a result. So impressions and visitors to the site is an interesting number, but if we're not tracking that through lead volume or e-commerce sales or email signups, whatever those triggers are, then we're kind of missing the point. A lot of noise isn't always successful. Then you take that even further. Well, what do those actions, like, what does it mean and how does it affect those business goals? If we don't know how many leads it takes to drive an appointment or a meeting or a sale, if we don't know what those metrics are, it's going to be really hard to know whether or not we're being successful. So in an ideal world, you can set up a dashboard that works its way backwards. To get one sale, I need to have 10 sales meetings. And to get 10 sales meetings, I need to have 100 interested people. And to get 100 interested people, I need to have 100,000 impressions. I'm making numbers up, but you have to be able to work that backwards so that you know, one, if you're even budgeting enough money in specific channels to drive the results people want on the back end. So that's the math of it. You have to figure out what those kind of funnels are to know whether or not you're being successful.
Okay. And I love that you mentioned budgeting because that was next on my list to discuss. So perfect setup, Lana. So budgeting is also really important. And there are a lot of different ways to create a budget. And so let's kind of break down what we usually see and then talk about what we would love to see. So what do we usually see, as the basis for a budget?
Two main things that I see is somebody will set a budget based on what they think the percentage of sales needs to be. Oh, well, 10% of my sales goes to my marketing budget, or 6% or 3%. Mm-hmm. It's just a random percentage, and it can fluctuate up and down every year based on how successful the company is in the prior year.
Well, and maybe not entirely random. Sometimes there's industry benchmarks. So they're using kind of industry data about what percentage it should be. And we hear that a lot.
Hear it a lot. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't affect, or it doesn't get influenced by changes in the industry or needing to ramp up or down for product launches or any major shifts that happened. And so it can be very inflexible. The other type that I see is, well, this is what we spent last year. So whatever we did last year, we can change whatever we want, but this is the budget. And so those are the two normal ones that I typically see.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, I think 98% of small businesses are using last year's budget. And maybe somewhere in their past history that was based on an industry standard. Yeah. And maybe that gets kind of sanity checked every time they get a new piece of information. And so it's not wrong if you don't know what kind of budget you should have. I think it's great to visit industry resources to find ideas of what a budget maybe could look like, but then you should be customizing and adjusting that to, your specific unique situation. And so your situation might be based on what, Lana?
So, I think that's, you could be looking at it based on, what is your growth goals? Are you trying to enter a new market? Are you trying to launch a new product? Is the market shifting and you need to reevaluate things? All of those things play into it.
Your business goals.
Yeah, all of that should be what you're basing your budget on. I mean, I think we get asked all the time, well, what should my budget be? And unfortunately, we oftentimes turns it around. It's like, well, what are you trying to accomplish? So those two things go hand in hand, and you have to really evaluate that together to figure out what the budget should be.
Yeah. And that's so hard because a lot of times people are very hesitant to give us their marketing budget, and I think that sometimes they're looking at us like we're the ad sales reps or something, where if they give us that number, then that number will become our suggestion. And to a certain extent, that's true because we can look at that number and say, we think that that's going to be great to hit your goals, or we don't think that's going to be enough to hit your goals. And the reality is every business has a budget. There is a reality to the dollars and cents that are available, and people, what people are going to be comfortable spending based on their past history and past results. And so I wish people were more comfortable and forthcoming with a budget, because sometimes we're having to build plans around, their goals, and that's fine, and we can do that. But until we attach numbers to it, we are going to suggest everything that could help them achieve their goals. And once we have a budget, we can really hone in on what we think is going to be the most effective.
And I think that's it. Often it comes to that, right? We try to evaluate everything that could be successful. And then we identify in what order would we potentially roll it out. And that's usually where things get cut. So what's the low hanging fruit or the high impact items? And how many of them can we do inside this budget? That's usually where it ends up. But sometimes we get customers that'll say, okay, well, what is it going to take to bring on 100 new customers next year? And when we have a really well-defined sales funnel, then we can work backwards into that number and say, well, we're going to have to spend this much in these channels in order to affect all the metrics that you need to actually close those accounts. And so that can be really eye-opening when we do it from that direction.
Yeah. So budgeting is a bit of an art, a bit of a science, figuring out what the goals are, what activities map to that, how much do we have to work with. And I think something that we try to do for our clients as well is think about the budget in terms of dollars, but also time commitment, because there are sometimes time requirements on the part of the client, whether it's developing new content, whether it's participating, in video shoots or new content development, or sometimes just the approval process alone. Like there's a reality to the time that that's going to take. And so certain activities might be more or less realistic, and we don't want to assume labor is free. Time is money for businesses. And so budgeting both on the dollar side, but also on the involvement side for the client to understand, how much they're able to participate is really important.
And I think sometimes we mentioned it earlier, but thinking through how to ramp up your marketing plan, especially if you haven't done a lot, or this isn't just revamping last year's plan. If you're saying, okay, this year, I'm going to do a plan and we're going to actually put some effort into marketing this year, I think the biggest way to get burnt out is to try and start and do everything at once. So really thinking through how much time and capacity do I have as the business leader and my team has, whether it's internal or an external team, in order to ramp up these programs and get them going. Because if you try and launch everything at the same time, it's going to be overwhelming. And then it's going to be hard to evaluate what's working, what's not working, especially if you don't have really good tracking in place to understand that on the back end.
Yep, that makes sense. So I want to kind of shift gears and talk about how do we even pick which activities are appropriate, right? So that's a big part of this. We're developing a marketing plan. We've already said, we see businesses doing lots of things. There's lots of activities happening in a small business, whether it's a combination of internal team members, external vendors. So how do we pick the activities that are going to be most impactful?
I think it goes back to your audience. So really understanding who you're trying to reach and where you can find them. So it could be radically different, whether you're a B2B or a B2C company or a nonprofit. Your audience is not one homogenous group of people. You might have an older demographic or a younger demographic. You might have more traditional methods or more digital methods that are going to reach and impact and affect your audience differently. So really going back to your key target audiences and understanding how and where to reach them and prioritizing those channels or platforms.
And there's also tools that we use. So when we're trying to map the activities to the goals, we use the marketing funnel, which you've already addressed a little bit, but maybe we can dig into that more to talk about how certain activities might be more effective at different stages.
Right. So if you're looking at kind of a marketing funnel that leads to sales, you've got an awareness, consideration, a sales section, retention and growth, and advocacy. And so depending on where you are in those phases, you need to have activities that match it. You don't want to do all one area and then not all awareness and then nothing on consideration, because it doesn't take one impression to reach and convince your audience. You need to nurture them along the way. So really mapping those out and understanding, oh, well, maybe social media or maybe some banner advertising or TV, we're going to reach an awareness level in that first phase, but that's not going to carry us all the way through. So in consideration, okay, well, they're coming to the website, they're reading articles and blogs and contents. Maybe they're watching a demo video. Those are all consideration activities that
maybe they're looking at competitors.
And so how can you, looking at that, how do you then target and message against them and position yourself for all of those consideration activities? And I think that's a big portion of it. And when you get into like the sales function, it's, whether you might have coupons, offers, presentations, sales proposals, demo videos, things like that. Those are all areas where you need to be moving them further along in the funnel towards your anticipated goal.
Yeah. So if you want to go Google sales and marketing funnel or marketing and sales funnel, make sure you don't look at just a sales funnel, and make sure you don't look at just a marketing funnel that's creating like an advertising funnel that's just creating awareness. So we like to map the funnel all the way from beginning to end. So you might even look or search under the name customer journey. So we love to use a customer journey map that shows all the way from their first touch to, long time multiple repeat purchasers or upselling opportunities on the other end, where they're referring people to you and they've become raving fans and consumers of whatever it is you make. So I think looking at that customer journey and taking a step back to say, where do you have and sometimes we see a lot of activity piled in just one area. You've mentioned very sales driven organizations. They may be really focused on like after the first point of contact, what happens.
Yes.
And so they may be missing awareness, or they may be missing onboarding or retention even. So I think it's important and, to make sure that you take that first look when you're building a great marketing plan to say, where do you already have efforts and where do you need, more lift?
I think you just pointed out something that I think is a really good point in the kind of the customer journey map. A section that often gets ignored is the after the sale phases. So like the retention and growth. A lot of organizations put so much energy and effort into bringing new customers in. They kind of forget that their existing customers is an area to mine for repeat business and referrals. And so that's a huge area that oftentimes takes less of a monetary lift to get a return on, because you don't have to make them remember who you are. They already know you. If they've had a good experience, they're already going to have a positive sentiment about you. It's just about mining that data and keeping you top of mind for either the repeat purchase or a referral strategy. So that's a huge one that I think people oftentimes overlook.
Yeah. So just simply said, advertising is very expensive. Trying to reach new people is the most expensive activity that a business usually has, where if you already have customers and they could be buying more frequently or buying more or producing referrals for you, all of that is significantly less expensive than trying to create awareness and attract new customers. So we see that all the time, that there might be some breakdown in the later part of the funnel when it comes to retention and referrals and nurturing those existing relationships. So super important.
Absolutely.
So we don't necessarily see a lot of clear goals, marketing goals or plans, and we do see a lot of activities and lots of people doing lots of things, but a lot of times they aren't really sure how or why to measure it. And so I want to move into discussing measuring those results. If we've decided on activities and budgets, we've understood who we're going after and where we're trying to affect the funnel. Measuring it is so hard sometimes. So let's dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's the most important thing that you can do is measure what you're doing. Because if you don't, how do you really evaluate what you should continue doing, what you should stop doing, or what you should like double down on and like triple your budget in? So the trick there is that there are a lot of things to measure. And so looking at a platform or an activity like social media or Google advertising or TV, and really understanding not only for that channel, but also for your industry, what are the benchmarks? So that's a great place to start, because there's a lot of Googling you can do to find a benchmark for these types of activities. And so starting with setting benchmarks, starting with just tracking it, writing it down and understanding what is happening now, and then applying a benchmark, or if that's too difficult, a historical number to see whether or not you're trending up or trending down in those activities.
Yeah. And the great thing about the digital world is that there's lots of numbers. The bad thing is that there are lots of numbers. There's so much information. There are so many reports, but if you break it down to its most simple metrics, how many people are you reaching? How many people are seeing it? Are they taking any kind of action or engaging with it in any capacity? And then are they converting? Are they moving to, off of a more awareness platform, like it might be social media or an advertising platform? Are they going to the website? Are they taking a next step? Are they attempting to engage with the organization? So that's like 3 or 4 really simple things to measure, but you have to slog through a whole lot of data sometimes to just pull those things out. And I think the reports, we see it even within our team, the reports can be overwhelming. There's so much information that can help you make it better or improve performance. But really, those are the top things that you're looking for. How many people, how engaged are they? What kind of action are they taking? If you can cut through all the noise and distill it down to that, it really helps.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing that companies struggle with, I think we can struggle with it sometimes too, when we're trying to understand how a client's business is flowing, is somewhere in the middle of that tracking, something gets disconnected. So you're like, I can see that we reach these people. I can see that they engaged with the website. I can see that people filled out forms or clicked to call or whatever happened. And then something in the middle happens, and then sales over here. And so that's really where the real work is trying to figure out how to map that, whether it's through a third-party tracking, whether it's through like old school, like, how did you hear about us? How, what brought you in today? I mean, anything will help beyond not tracking. So that's really the hardest part, is that the little part in the middle right before the sale happens.
Right. I mean, there's so many different ways to track things. We could spend an hour just talking about that. And maybe we should do a whole episode on tracking now that we've said that out loud. I think some of the biggest breakdowns we have seen are just, one of them you mentioned, how did you hear about us? Training the internal team. If you're going to have a lot of call generated traffic from digital or analog practices, like there may not be a way to make a connection. You can set up like call tracking that, if you're using unique numbers that can record all of those results. And there's some neat AI features now that are kind of baked into those that can help analyze the quality of the call and how the reps are doing and stuff like that. But oftentimes people are taking that final action based on impressions from numerous sources too. So having the team that takes that call ask, how did you hear about us? Where did you see us? And like, for some reason, that's such a hard thing to train a team to do.
Yeah, it seems so like difficult at the time, in the moment when you're engaging with a customer. But if you can work it into, and sometimes what really helps is developing actual scripts for your frontline people so that they can work it into their normal, language patterns and make it easier so it sounds natural coming out. I know a lot of times it's like, oh, I've got to collect all this information, and by the time I get to that question, the customer's just done. So being able to work with kind of the flow and training can really help get a higher level of that question being asked. And it's invaluable from a marketing perspective.
Absolutely. So I think that when I think about, tracking issues that I've seen, like asking, how did you hear about us, is one. If you require that information within some kind of a sales order system or a CRM, I think another huge issue that I see is it defaulting to what seems like your biggest activity. We have analyzed so many different, like, how did you hear about us results? And inevitably, the first one on the list is always the biggest, right?
Surprise.
And that's because it defaults there. So if you have a tracking system that requires people to manually enter it, I like to change the first one to didn't ask or don't know, so that it's not throwing off all of your data in the other categories. So just that's a lessons learned the really, really hard way tip is don't default to something meaningful. Other tracking situations I've seen, probably one of the worst ones was a phone company that we worked with 1 million years ago, paid a lot of money over in service labor to have us put a unique tracking code on every single ad that they ran. And this is dating me, how old I am, but when the phone service products started changing, before everyone had mobile devices and landlines were kind of gone, they were trying to address that. And they said, hey, we have to figure out which of these ads are working and which aren't. And, they had paid us for years of applying these tracking codes, and they had never once run a report.
Yeah. So first, do the tracking, but second, look at the reports. That's really important. I think, I'll date myself as well. Definitely back in the Yellow Pages day, that was one of the tactics was not to put your real number, but put your tracking number on individual location ads. And that was a beast. It was super expensive. So not looking at that was just a waste of time.
So if you're going to set up tracking, pull the reports, use it. Looking at results, depending on how much you're spending and what types of media you're doing, you might look at reports monthly. You might look at them more frequently. You might look at them weekly if it's something that's very dynamic, like digital, that you can adjust or tweak in the early stages. So when you have the ability to adjust and impact things along the course of an activity that you're trying, for the first time, or even something that could slip. We deal with algorithms in the digital world all the time that I feel like we're continually fighting. And if you don't stay on top of that, like in 1 week, you could spend a whole bunch of money and it could be somewhat disastrous.
Yeah. I mean, especially there just seems to be so much more just bot activity happening out on in the world. And so if website traffic and like lead funnel conversion is a big part of your kind of business model, really understanding and looking at that when you spin up a new activity to drive traffic to your website, making sure when you see a spike in traffic, let's go look at that. Let's make sure that's legit. Is it in our geography? Is it the right type of people? Is conversion activity happening? Is it all bouncing? Because, you look at one number and you're like, okay, great, it's working. Let's keep doing this. You have to really always, always dig into and follow that line as far as you can to see whether or not it's legitimate and working. Because Google will help you spend your money. That's
100% of the time, Google will spend your money. A smaller percentage of the time, it will be effective.
It will work. Yes,
exactly. So speaking of some of these challenges, like before we move over to QA, so if any of you have any questions about anything that we've discussed so far, feel free to start putting those in the QA. We'll come to that in just a moment, but people love horror stories. So what are some of the biggest mistakes that you've seen made, Lana?
Oh, wow. Okay. So I definitely have seen a lot of media buys happen in the past because of the free deals that they got. Oh, well, I'm gonna do an extra promo for you, or we're gonna give you some extra spots. But the entire buy was general run. And so when you looked at the reports after the fact, and thankfully this wasn't a buy I put together, but it was one that I took over, and I was like, well, I hope all of our buyers are watching TV overnight. because that's where all of our spots ran. So evaluating,
but they're so affordable.
They're so affordable. It's cheap. Or they're on stations like again, dating myself, back in cable days where you bought individual stations. If they didn't match up to your audience, then I could have, 1,000 free spots, but it wouldn't do any good. It wouldn't move the number. So that's really important, is again, just go back to your audience and make sure you're not wasting time with activities that are not going to reach who you're trying to talk to.
Absolutely. And then, I think you touched on it, but not every idea works. Marketing takes some trial and error, right?
It does. And not only trial and error, but also certain activities are like much faster to be able to evaluate. And some of them take a little bit of ramp up time. So if, your goal is to get your awareness up really fast because of a launch and you want everyone to hear about it, starting on a regular cadence of SEO is not going to necessarily get you here tomorrow. It's a good practice. You need to make sure that's a part of your plan, but having the right expectations and giving each program the right amount of time to evaluate effectiveness is really important. And they're not all the same. Google Ads, you turn it on, and if you're monitoring it, again, that's one where I would spend a lot of time on a week, almost every other day basis at the very beginning to optimize and evaluate, because again, it'll spend your money super fast. So you got to be on top of that. And that shows actions immediately. Other items, even social media can show some activities, but that one takes a little bit more of figuring out your audience and working through what engagement activities are really going to drive the intended results. So some activities take a little bit longer, some are much shorter.
Yeah. And so when you're putting together a marketing plan, kind of understanding that there's a minimum amount of time that you have to do certain activities is important, because one thing that we do see is entrepreneurs love to chase shiny red balls, right? So we work with a lot of small businesses, a lot of really intelligent and forward-thinking entrepreneurs that are always looking for the next thing, always reading, always on top of stuff. And so they'll jump on the things that they're seeing, or they'll go back to the marketing team. And before you know it, like if you did have a marketing plan, it's out the window because they're changing on a dime and expecting the team to kind of move with it. So I think that can be a really big challenge for internal marketing teams, and just for small businesses that are owners that are having to self-manage. So being self-aware that the latest, greatest, newest may or may not fit into the marketing plan, and it may distract or detract from the budget or the activities that are already in place. So keeping an eye on yourself if you are an owner, and I'm an entrepreneur, so I get it.
I think it's just about the balance, right? Because I think it is a good idea to try new things. And if you hear about something, or you read about something, or someone tells you about something that worked for them, ignoring that could be, silly. But there is a balance, and some activities take a couple of cycles. Like maybe this was a good idea, but there was something wrong in the execution. So we need to try again and change it up a little bit. I'm a big supporter of iterating. Let's try this thing, and then let's evaluate how it worked, and then identify what could make it better. Now let's go phase 2 and let's try it again. But at a certain point, you don't want to just keep doing it just because this is what we've always done. If it's not working, it's not working, and you definitely need to adjust course.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I just want to check in with Tangela and see, do we have anything in the QA? Any questions come in?
We do. We have one question, and it's sort of stemming around the ever-changing marketing landscape. So wants to know, how far in advance should a marketing team realistically plan today, given the ever-changing marketing landscape?
I think an annual plan is still effective in terms of giving yourself a budget, a general budget, and a roadmap. Now, again, it shouldn't be a set it and forget it activity. I think you need to be managing your programs on a weekly basis. You need to be reporting on and evaluating success, at least on a monthly basis. And, depending on the activities, you might be adjusting along the way, but at a minimum, you should be taking a few steps back quarterly to really evaluate, is this still working? Is this still a good idea? And do we need to make any major changes moving forward? I don't think it should be a set it and forget it by any means.
Okay, thank you for that. And I do have another question. This question is about communicating to leadership who has not quite bought in on the concept of a marketing plan. Do you have any tips on how to communicate that to those executives who resist it?
Well, I think communication is the best thing. And so when we work with clients to put plans together, I think the biggest reason why we see success is because we get everyone together, all the stakeholders, and we build the plan together. So if it's a matter of getting buy-in, I think everyone has to participate. If it's a matter of getting approval to do one, you need to put it back into the mindset or the positioning. You need to frame it as business goals. We don't want to do a marketing plan so we can have marketing. We want to do a marketing plan because we want to help affect the business goals. We want to help improve our performance so that marketing leads to business success.
Yeah, so making sure you're really clear, making sure you start by asking about those business goals and asking how marketing can support them, I think is the key. So making sure you have that information. And then, I'm a big fan of understanding the personality profile of the person you're trying to communicate with. Some people love pictures, so they might want to see campaign plans graphed or mapped out like over time with pretty colors that paint a picture, and they may be able to very quickly absorb that information. Other people, especially finance oriented, they may want to see us. Yep, that would be Lana. I would be the picture person. Lana would be the spreadsheet person. So they may want to see the cold hard numbers, and they may want to see it in incredible detail, right? Yeah. So looking at who you're speaking to, and you may have one of each type, right? Some people may want to discuss it with you and debate it and have a dialogue. And so I really feel like making sure that you're clear on the goals, that everyone's aligned on those goals, and then presenting the information in the way that they want to see it can go a long way.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have one more question, and this attendee is asking for tips on how to market to influence public policy.
Tips on influencing public policy. Well, I think it's definitely, again, is going to go back to stakeholder groups. So if it's about advocacy, you're definitely going to want to find those groups and where they're naturally congregating. Obviously, we all think of social media. There's a lot of social advocacy that's happening. So finding those groups, becoming a part of those groups. And I think, first engaging on a listening strategy to really understand what the motivators, challenges, decision-making is there, and then start participating in those groups. I think that's really where you have to be a part of the group and not just talking at the group in order to influence those initial change organizations.
We got one more that came in. Thank you for that, Lana. So this one is a bit similar to the one earlier, but it's asking for some recommendations on annual planning and how to have that communication with your CRO, who is in charge of performance marketing. And there is some misalignment there on revenue targets and sales targets. So do you have any recommendations on how to communicate that in terms of an annual planning strategy?
So with a CRO, that's definitely going to be revenue-oriented person. So it's all about the end result first. That person is going to have very little patience for, impressions and clicks. They want to know what is influencing and driving more leads, more appointments, more sales calls, things like that. So I think having a funnel conversation with them, working backwards to help identify what numbers they need in order to meet their goals. And I think everything stems from that. Once you get back to what the numbers are and you can identify who the audience groups are, you can then very much get a lot of public support or just support from your CRO in terms of the activities that you want to engage in. But if you don't start with the results first, I think that's a conversation that just is hard to get through because they're thinking about the end result first.
Great advice. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We are going to have, Kate will put a link to a very, very brief survey in the chat. Please take a moment to give us some feedback if you don't mind. And also let us know what topics you'd like to see us discuss in 2026, because we're doing all of our planning for next year. So I would love to hear what would be most meaningful to you. You can follow us on Eventbrite for notifications about upcoming live episodes like this one that you're joining today. And all of our past episodes are on our YouTube channel. So Kate will include a link to our YouTube channel as well. We do not have permission to message you outside of Eventbrite unless you opt into our mailing list. So the very best way to stay in touch is to join our mailing list. That way we will notify you not just about upcoming CMO Scoop episodes, but also give you access to articles and tools that are not available through Eventbrite. So you can get there from our homepage, and we'll put a link in the chat for that as well. I want to thank you all for joining this live recording of the CMO Scoop, and we'll stay on just a smidge longer so that you can get access to those links. And if anybody has any additional questions that you want to throw at us, while we're on, be happy to entertain a few more. But for all of you that are going to drop off, thank you so much for joining. Appreciate you.
Thank you.